Hi, I'm going to show you a tool set that'll help to extract configuration parameters from a Cisco ASA config into importable packages for the Sophos XG. So this will dramatically cut down the amount of time that you have to invest in a project to move from one platform to the other. So the way it works is you've got a tool set here, the ASA to XG. And with this tool set, there's a configuration menu that controls everything. There's an output directory for the API packages, and then I've included some sample test data. So I'm going to start off with the aliases, right? So this is a common practice where you have many, many IP addresses that you want to bind to your WAN and use. Typically, those addresses do require NAT policies. So here I've got, I don't know, one, two, three, four, five addresses. I've worked on this with hundreds of addresses that somebody needs to use on their XG appliance, and it does the same thing. For time's sake, I just using those five. So here, if we look at the port 2, my WAN, I've only got one binding. If I look at my system profiles, and then under my network address translations, I only have the default. So let's go back to and start up the menu system. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to load a config. So I'm going to use the sample aliases.txt. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and do number 4, make alias interfaces, right? So this is going to produce, so I have to define what port 2. This is going to produce an API package that we can import in the output directory. So it says here the aliases API.tar is complete. So if I go over here to my output directory, here it is, current date and time. So now in the XG, backup firmware, import export, choose a file. My alias is AP in my output directory. I go ahead, now I'm going to bring up the shell on the XG. This helps so that you can see. Oops, I typed it wrong. CD down to log, tail, -f, API, parser.logs. Let's get that going and go ahead. It's set, import. Let's go back to the shell. And you can see here it's going ahead and creating those 5 interfaces and the corresponding NAT policies. At the end, it should say something about being complete 200 successful as it goes through. So it creates the host objects, the NAT interfaces. So here it is, op response code, status 200, import done successfully. That's the last thing. So if we look at our network now, takes a little bit more time on the UI to catch up to where we're at. So while we're getting caught up, I'm going to convert the Cisco config so I can extract the network object. So if we look here, I've got a sample Cisco config, and this is a pretty complex config with hundreds of network objects and many, many groups, right? So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go back to the menuing system. So first thing, I'm going to clear screen. I'm going to set my config file. It's going to be the sample cfg.txt. Okay, and then extract network objects. This one actually creates 2 API files to be imported. One is your global network objects from the Cisco config, and the other one is your group objects with inline definitions. So it put those in the output directory. If we look here in the output, you got your API, IP host, and your groups. So it says here, my API imported successfully for my aliases. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So there's the bindings it had created on the alias import. And now let's take a look under profiles and NAT policies. And there's all your NAT policies that you can now use in firewall rules, right? This helps to cut down on typos and repetitiveness. So let's go ahead and back up firmware. Go ahead and import those APIs for the groups. You know what? Before that, let me show you. I don't have any groups on here. I don't have any. I have the default hosts with obviously the NAT definitions that we just created, um, and we don't have any IP service groups. If you look here, there's nothing. So no groups. So we've extracted those from that Cisco config, import, export, choose a file. First one we're going to do is the API hosts.tar. And again, I'm going to go back to my log and watch that log go through. It's creating all the different host definitions inside our law and such. It's finished. That's the global, the API IP host is the global uh, host extraction. Now I'm going to do the groups. It's not done yet over here in the UI. It's done in the shell. It just takes the UI some time to get caught up, I suppose. So let's see. Okay, API imported successfully. I can show you the hosts. You can see now that there's many, many pages of host. Before there weren't, so there's 2 pages of host. So it went ahead and it created all those different definitions. So let's go ahead and import the groups now, the host groups. Choose a file, groups XML, and import. Okay, so then we're going to come back to our tail of the actual log and watching. So what's happening here is it's not only building using those global definitions of the hosts that were created on the previous import, but it's also um, creating hosts in line. So one thing Cisco does do is they have the namespaces in their global. They store actual host and subnet definitions that can be created and such, and ranges for that matter. They also, when in their network groups, they allow the creation of those definitions within the group, and not only using reference to the global, but the creation to new objects in the groups themselves. That can be a problem because there is a possibility for duplicate names between the global and the group host creations. In the XG, we have one namespace for our hosts and one namespace for our groups. So we need to refer to everything as group members. So it says here that the status code 200 and it was successful. So again, the API the web UI is catching up. So as I was saying about the how they do things, Cisco does things in different namespaces. So there is a possibility of collision of names of objects. You have to be careful of that, and you have to refer back to your log entry here. If you see that, you may actually have to go into the Cisco config and rename some objects that could cause a name collision since we have one namespace for hosts and one namespace for groups, and they actually have multiple. So it imported successfully. Let's take a look at that. Host definitions. So as you see here, there's many, many more pages of hosts because they created those in that namespace. But if I look at the IP host groups, bam, there they all are. So if we look at some of these memberships, you can see this has that one inside about the VoIP, another address space, controllers, the blacklist with all the different addresses. So this was extracted from that Cisco config. Now that makes it very, very easy to now start creating firewall rules because in your firewall rule set, you don't have to create anything. I can say drop source zone LAN source networks, any, destination, WAN, and now I can browse my inventory for my blacklist group. So any service, don't match known users, log firewall traffic, and save. In previous to this tool, you would actually have to manually create that entire definition, right? And all those members. You must enter a value for the rule. Oh, thought I called it blacklist. So there you go. So manually entering that stuff takes a long time. It's possible that you're going to typo on it. And now for customers moving from one platform to the other, they'll have objects there that they recognize the names of them and how they should be used. And then you just have to read the ACLs to associate things. So there you go. That's a quick introduction to, it also does the service objects you can do and the service groups. So for time of this video, just wanted to give a quick introduction for everybody, and I think that does it. Thanks a lot.